Twilight Imperium, Fortress Ordinian, by Daniel Lovat Clark, narrated by Mark Restuccia. Reconnaissance Company Alpha, aka Wolfhounds, Sol 67th Marine Division, Salient Sun Task Force, Ordinian, 6 days after planet fall. Some planets had weather. Ordinian's sky was full of necro drones, and the flak flechettes spat from auto-turrets that shot them down. Grok Waisho wondered what the Ordinian sky was supposed to look like, what it smelled like after a rain. Had it been as beautiful as Archon Ren? He could still see the bones of the planet, the mountains that formed the bowl-shaped valley where the Salient Sun Task Force had made their planet fall. He could imagine the trees that should be there, the flesh on the bones, the hidden streams splashing down to the crater lake in the center of the valley. It should be beautiful, he decided. He thought of asking Prin, but if he recalled correctly, she had lived on the other side of the planet. Wool gathering. Dukan's gruff voice had been Waisho's constant companion, as much as the distant bellow of the auto-turrets and the spack, spack, spack of drone fall. A Yordian expression? Waisho asked. What is its meaning, please? Staring off into space, thinking about some damn thing or another that's of not much use to the here and now. Captain Gerald Dukan shrugged as he joined Waisho by the firebase's sandbag wall. He was tall, by Yordian standards. He came up to Waisho's shoulder. No, I don't have any better idea than you do where it comes from. Then yes, wool gathering. Waisho pressed a button on his wrist, and his oculars settled into place. He studied the mountain pass falling away below them, searching vainly for a sign that Ordinian had survived the ravages of the necrovirus. Searching with much more success for signs that the enemy was approaching. Movement. Waisho gave no orders. Dukan was the captain of this company. His was the command. Waisho was technically an advisor, embedded by the Extra Kingdom into this Federation of Sol unit to promote cross-training and closer diplomatic ties between the two polities. Sometime in the second year of their war against the necrovirus, those artificial divisions between Sol and Extra seemed to have melted away. The Salient Sun Task Force hadn't been shy about picking up strays either. Scanners see them, called Prin from her perch by their comms tower. She was a perfectly average size for a Naz, but that still made her literally knee-high to the taller members of the unit. She preferred to perch on top of something to avoid getting stepped on. Equipment, Waisho's exocarapace, whatever was convenient. The tower was where all of their comms and sensor equipment was clustered, old-fashioned wires snaking up and down the scaffolding as hardening against necro wireless penetration. Prin was the company's tech expert, and most of her advances in the fight against the necro looked like steps backward, regressing to older, bulkier, dumber technology that couldn't be subverted by a malevolent, self-replicating software glitch. Esposito, Van Sant, Chen, to the front, barked Dukan. 3 of his best Marines jogged forward, checking their rifles as they went, and took positions along the fortifications. Grok, any armor? Not this time, Captain. Repurposed soil tillers, I think. When they'd first encountered the necro all those years ago, the X-Char had thought what most people thought. They were a machine race of malevolent robots, building endless waves of disposable drones as part of a grand strategy to destroy organic life. Everyone thought that at first, when they first met the necro swarms, but it wasn't very accurate. The hordes of efficient combat robots were actually a minority of necro units and a limited expression of what the necro were. In truth, the necrovirus was hardly a group of evil machines. It was aptly named a bug in code. a self-replicating virus that hated all organic life and could infect any sufficiently advanced computer system. The Nars Rokha settlers on Ordinian had made widespread use of advanced technology and a dizzying array of drones, servos, familiars, and all sorts of low-end AI throughout their society. All of it was compromised by the necrovirus within minutes of their invasion reaching orbit. Hundreds of thousands of Nars and Rokha civilians died in hours, murdered by their own machines. An entire civilization's worth of discarded drones and familiars was still wandering the planet, hating organic life and hurling themselves at the Marines' guns with all the cunning and intelligence of a rock slide. But also, like a rock slide, they put the Marines in constant danger of being swept away and crushed. The soil tillers rushed forward on skittering mechanical legs. Their spinning tool heads were caked in dirt and blood, their scanners and lights glowing with red malice. Like every other piece of evil farm equipment that had stormed their position, they came apart under the steady chatter of the Marines' guns. "You're the expert," Dukan said. "What do you think they're trying to accomplish here?" "I imagine they wish to kill us, scavenge our equipment, and replace our fleshy bodies with more robot drones." "Obviously. I mean, why are they sending outdated farm equipment out to die?" "Hoping we run out of bullets before they run out of agri-familiars?" We might." Dukan frowned and studied the inert machines for a silent moment. Satisfied they were dead, he gestured his fire team back to cover. "They are intelligent," Waisho said. "Why might you use such a tactic?" "To confirm our position for an airstrike, maybe? Prin, specialist, any chatter?" The Nars looked up from her screens. Most of their equipment was human-scaled, and she'd surrounded herself with a nest of monitors.
"Each of those necrofamilias squawked as they died, Captain. I can't tell you anything more than that because—"
Yeah, passive listening only. Risk of software contamination. I got it."
"It seems likely you are correct,"
observed Waisho. "Gee, do I win a prize?" Dukan strode to the center of their little strong point, between the comms tower and the entrance to the subterranean barracks. "Listen up. Expect incoming aerial drones. Load for duck hunting." Just another day. There are about 100 Marines stationed at this base, a dozen or so bases just like it scattered across the mountains. Each one held a pass into the valley where Fortress Ordinian was being built. Auto-turrets kept the worst of the flying drones off their backs. Regular patrols kept the airspace above the valley clear for orbital access. They'd landed, swept their LZ clear, secured its perimeter, all a textbook operation. The Joint Task Force was operating as smoothly as any unit in Waisho's long and over-eventful career. And they completely stalled out on their offensive after only 6 days. While Marines rushed to secure positions around the base, bracing flak launchers or rifles with scattershot ammunition, Waisho had to wonder what he was doing here. Ordinian was a wasteland, completely fallen to the necrovirus. He understood why Prin was here, reclaiming her home, vengeance for her fallen Rokha partner whom she never discussed. But why was he? Why hadn't he returned home to Archon Ren a year ago? He had no good answer, so he lifted a shell rifle and took position just as the first of the hunter swarm crested the ridge and fell on the camp. The necro drones were flying low to avoid radar detection and auto-turret flechettes, skimming just over the earth and juking left and right to avoid incoming fire. "They've improved the design since Kal Hadar," grumbled Dukan. Indeed, the newest generation of necro attack drones was sleeker, more agile in the air, each one looking something like a stooping razorhawk.
"Fortunately, my friend, so have we."
Waisho toggled his fire selector to wide burst and launched the first shell at an incoming drone. The shell burst, turning into a tiny high-velocity hailstorm of molten metal and tore through the drone's rightmost thruster. Dukan observed the kill through his scope, waiting for something to get close enough for his plasma rifle to be needed. Nice shot. Can you do that? Oh, about 70 more times.
We shall see.
Waisho fired again. A miss. All around the firebase, Marines were doing the same, filling the air with shards of lethal metal. The drones maneuvered like a flock of birds, all abruptly twisting up and away as they dropped their first payload of anti-personnel flechettes. Cover! Dukan shouted, unnecessarily. Marines dropped behind their fortifications as razor-sharp blades rattled off the ferrocrete around them, sliced into the sandbags, embedded into their armour. "Code Red!" shouted Private Van Sant. She was dragging Chen back into cover, leaving a trail of red blood behind him. "Need antitoxin and sanitation now!" Specialist Prin scrambled out of her cover and leapt to the scaffold that ran over the camp, her 4 arms making easy work of the climb. She dropped down onto Chen's chest, 2 arms holding his wounded arm in place, while 2 more worked her medical kit. An injection of broad-spectrum antitoxin should neutralize the toxins the Necro loved to lace their darts with. A carefully directed EMP would hopefully nullify the nanites that were already trying to colonize Chen's bloodstream. The Necro drones came about for another pass. They'd lost perhaps a quarter of their number, but there were still dozens of them, and each one lethal. "Somewhere there's a factory just building more," Dukan muttered, echoing Waisho's thoughts.
Yet this attack will fail,
Waisho assured him.
And we will stand, a bastion of hope on this benighted world.
"The last bastion," Dukan agreed. "Something about this smells wrong. This is penny ante crap. Where are the heavy hitters?" He cursed, pulled out his comm unit with its chunky handset. "Hi, this is Wolfhound Actual. We're being suppressed by Necro drones. Have to assume incoming major attack. Analyze my position. Where is the goddamn Necro armor?" High above, the salient sun cruiser FSS Durandal turned its scopes planetward. After a moment, the shrieking, unmusical voice of the Durandal's acting ground operations officer crackled in Dukan's ear. 3 Mordred-class mechs approaching from 47 East. Figures. Dukan slammed the handset against the scaffold with a curse. 3 inbound mechs. I need sliver launchers all along the eastern approach. Who's available? "Code Red!" came another shout. Another Marine down. And "Code Black!" A Marine dead. Probably took a hit through their helmet's faceplate. "Waisho, you're with me," Dukan barked, and they both jogged to the closest armory rack for sliver launchers. "Hi, Wolfhound Actual. Some air support would be lovely right now." "Air support inbound, Captain." "Oh, happy day." Dukan braced his sliver launcher while Waisho crouched at his side, pointing the targeting laser downrange. "Got any more words of optimism for me, Grog?"
You heard High Gel. Air support inbound. No sweeter words in any language for a pair of ground pounders like us.
Remind me to read you in on Murphy's Laws of Combat someday.
Is this another foundational work of your people's culture, like the art of war?
Yep, just like that. I see movement.
I see it too, but the mech, its weapons aren't pointed at us.
No. Dukan's eyes narrowed. That's not a usual loadout for a Necro mech. God damn it, Grok. Is that an anti-aircraft configuration?
I think...
A shout came from the Marines around them. "Captain!" cried Prin. "Look!" The waves of assaulting drones had pulled back, shooting up into the air and deploying shimmering clouds of radar-refractive chaff. "They're blinding the..." Dukan pulled his handset out and screamed into it. "Hi, Wolfhound Actual. Abort air support. It's a trap." The sound of High-Eye's response was lost in the air-tearing scream of the approaching engines on the Hurricane-class fighters. Weisho announced target lock as he painted the closest mech with a laser. Dukan fired the sliver launcher. The rocket impacted cleanly on the underside of the Mordred mech's shell, a disabling shot that would immobilize the machine and block access up the pass. But its anti-air cannons fired anyway. Both Hurricane fighters came apart in the air above the base, blooming into intense fireballs as they cratered against the mountains a few clicks away. The surviving Mordred mechs paused on their approach, dropping their spent AA ordnance and reconfiguring for ground assault. That was their goal all along, Dukan cursed. They can make more drones. We can't replace those fighters. Weisho frowned, running one finger along the scales beneath his chin. Then he turned and lined up the targeting laser as the next mech in line began climbing over its immobilized comrade. FSS Durandal, Red Chivalry Fleet, Salient Sun Task Force, Ordinian Orbit. In orbit, Provisional Lieutenant Fargren Ion Vide's shriek sent several of the human and ex-char officers in ops wincing. The Shikrai tore off her headset and spun at her station, beak clacking. "Fortress Ordinian's combat air patrol is terminated," she reported in her clipped, squawky voice. "Ordinian flight control estimates 5 minutes before reinforcements are scrambled." Fargren took a moment to smooth her feathers as the Commodore made her ponderous way across the deck. The ship was soul-made, squat and cramped and ugly compared to a proper Argent flight vessel like her late-lamented Coatl. Serving on her was an adjustment, but at least she got to keep bringing the fight to the necrovirus rather than retreating, preening feathers and hoping that the problem would go away, as it seemed governments around the galaxy preferred. "Commodore, I'm sure the ground teams would love to hear something about reinforcements. Can we truly expect nothing?" "Nothing," agreed Commodore Tialak. She tapped at the nearest holodisplay, calling up a tactical map of the planet. An inset showed the situation in Rondino Valley. The display was calibrated at average human height, leaving the extra officer looking down at it. She made it look natural, like looking down at everything was her birthright. "Officially, the Salient Sun Joint Task Force was to be disbanded over a year ago. The Galactic Council and their various home governments wanted to reassess, to realign priorities. We are unauthorized out here. You knew that when we scraped you out of the wreck of the Coatl." Fargren bristled. The Coatl had been the pride and joy of the Argent Flight Navy. She'd been proud to serve on her. Heartbroken to see the ship torn apart by a necro swarm, systems crashing from within due to necro software incursion. Terrified to jettison her escape pod, hoping against hope she and the half-dozen technicians with her could survive. The Durandal was, by every measure, an inferior ship, her crew less expertly trained, her technology generations out of date. Inferior by every measure, except that she was still flying, still doing battle with the necrovirus, and the Coatl wasn't. Silence hung in the air as Tialak studied the tactical display. Fargren didn't have to. She held it all in her head, in her heart. The courage and tactical acumen of the Marines on the planet's surface was the equal of anything Fargren had ever seen serving in the Argent flight, and it was demonstrably, inevitably insufficient. "Hi, Wolfhound Actual," came the tinny voice from her headset. "I'm detecting more movement beyond my perimeter. Can you confirm? What's coming for us?" Fargren slipped her headset back on, spun again to face her workstation, fingers dancing over the controls. "Stand by, Wolfhound. I'm detecting large-scale drone movement outside the operational zone. It looks like they're assembling a colossal-scale attack drone." "Yeah, I wonder when those would come out to play. That must mean they think we're done, right? This is the hammer blow." "I couldn't speculate, Captain." Fargren tried to keep her voice level. She knew that humans found her shrill and unpleasant in this awkward, unmusical language. She just hoped she didn't sound scared. "All right, Hi. Be advised that Alpha Company has less than a dozen sliver rockets remaining at this position. We're fixed okay for Ak, but this ground offensive is going to break us." There was an interruption on the line for a moment. Then his voice came back. Voice only, of course. The clumsy analog tech they were using, the only kind they'd found the Necro couldn't use to infiltrate their systems, didn't allow for video. "By my estimation, if the enemy situates a gun emplacement here, they can command the entire valley. Fortress Ordinian will be rubble in hours."
"Understood, Wolfhand. Good hunting."
"You hear that, you bunch of lazy grubs?" She said, "Good hunting. Let's bag us some goddamn trophies." Fargren sighed and turned to the Commodore again, finding her with one earpiece pressed to her head. The ex-Jar had listened to every word.
"Commodore?"
she began, but Tialak cut her off.
"I'm conferring with Fortress Ordinian," she said. "There are similar offensives happening at 3 other choke points into the valley. Fortress can't reinforce all 4, said Fargren. "Can we drop more troops?" "Everything we can spare is already on the ground."
The ex-Jar drummed her fingers.
"Lieutenant Vide, draw me up an evacuation plan. Prioritize lives, then material."
Fargren saluted and turned to comply. They already had an evacuation plan on file, of course. They'd drawn one up as soon as the strike force had made planetfall. The last revision was 2 days old. Fargren called it up and began revising on the fly with current troop dispositions and casualty numbers. In minutes, she had the plan up to date and the estimates appropriately revised. They were not good.
2 days,
sighed Tialak.
40 hours,
clarified Fargren, then clacked her beak shut. Pedantry directed at one's commanding officer wasn't appreciated in either Sol or extra command structures.
"Candidly, Fargren,"
said Tialak, using her given name to indicate they were speaking off the record.
"How long can our Marines hold out? If they survive until they receive air support, they may endure this assault. But the last flight of Hurricanes was shot down. We don't have total superiority in theatre. We barely have orbital superiority."
It was a stark, mechanistic rule of war. Heroism and valor meant nothing compared to the cold, impossible weight of logistics. Salient Sun had a handful of starships and a few thousand ground troops. The necrovirus had an entire planet's worth of raw materials and repurposed industrial capacity.
"Begin the evacuation,"
Tialak said.
"Abandon all material. Personnel only. Marines to withdraw for dust-off in..."
Fargren revised her calculations appropriately.
12 hours, Commodore."
Tialak nodded.
"It's not a total loss, you know. Losing the material hurts, but we have thousands of personnel with experience fighting the necrovirus down there, with techniques that work and the confidence to use them. We retreat. We resupply. We can try again." "As you say, Commodore."
It still felt like a loss. Tialak turned to give the order fleet-wide. Fargren focused her attention on the fire teams of Alpha Company, desperate to find a solution, something to buy those Marines just another few minutes. The contact alarm was a single, blaring tone, tearing through the tension and Fargren's concentration like it had been tissue paper.
"Contact. Sensor contact. FTL drive signature inbound from Vector 318-89.
"Necro?" Tialak asked. The return of the Necro swarm that had once haunted this region was a constant fear. It would mean an immediate retreat of their understrength fleet.
"Not a swarm, Commodore. Single drive signature, cruiser scale, consistent with a Sol ship."
Sensors were being run by a young human man named Vidal. He pushed his feed to the central holodisplay.
"The necrovirus has been known to assimilate Sol ships before,"
Tialak commented mildly.
"Continue the evacuation, please. Passive sensors and light-speed comms only. Raise that ship as soon as possible."
Long minutes passed.
The orbital lighters reported status green and dropped planetward. One of the marine emplacements reported it had engaged the enemy. Vargran kept her thoughts focused on her task, doing her best to ignore the ever-growing promise or threat of the incoming sensor contact. IFF broadcast indicates the new contact is a friendly FSS Orlando of the Salient Sun Task Force, Green Longbow Fleet, said Vidal, shattering the silence and Vargran's vain attempt to focus. Tialak's XO stepped forward, a human woman rubbing a hand over the stubble on her shaved head. Green Longbow fought and lost against the Necro Swarm over a month ago, she said. Orlando was one of 2 ships unaccounted for. The rest self-scuttled rather than be assimilated. A beat of silence as Tialak studied the feed, her reptilian face inscrutable. Begin plotting firing solutions, she said. Passive only. Navigation, plot us a course to intercept and shield the evacuation fleet. Orlando has translated out of FTL, reported Vidal. Now incoming in real space. 6 hours, 7 minutes to orbital intercept. 6 hours? That can't be right, objected the XO. They're coming in too fast. Hostile approach, suggested the Commodore. At that speed, they'll get one exchange before they're out of range again, or splattered on the planet, depending on their heading. Tialak stared at the plotting hollow. Ops hummed with all the things no one was saying. Comms, raise the Orlando. Long seconds passed as light travelled the vast distances. Incoming transmission from Orlando, reported the communications officer, a diminutive ex-char man. At a nod from Tialak, he pressed a key and flooded the operations centre with a strained human voice. This is Acting Captain Nichols of the FSS Orlando. We have an Apollo priority relief payload for Ordinian. Be advised we will be aero-braking. Please clear our flight path. Aero-braking? The XO scowled. The damn fool's going to hit the atmosphere. On purpose. They're certainly in a terrible hurry, Tialak observed. I've got a revised plot, reported Vidal. Aero-braking helps explain their speed, sirs. Does anyone know Nichols? Young, said the XO. Ordinian, a lieutenant if memory serves, but a good one. In your judgment, would she scuttle her ship before allowing necro assimilation? I said she was a good one, didn't I? The XO shrugged. Tialak considered. The assembled officers waited, watching the numbers on the display slowly creep toward 0. Clear that flight path as requested. Otherwise, continue evacuation and revising firing solution. If Orlando performs any maneuvers not consistent with an aero-braking orbital insertion or landing on Ordinian, open fire immediately. Shall we reply, madam? Asked the comms officer. Please inform Acting Captain Nichols of everything I've just said, including my standing orders to the gun crews. Well, that's a fine welcome home, isn't it? Muttered the XO. She studied the displays as the Commodore's orders were followed. Shift change in 2 hours. Get some rest, Commodore. I'll mind the store. Reconnaissance Company Alpha, a.k.a. Wolfhounds, Sol 67th Marine Division, Salient Sun Task Force, Ordinian, 7 days after planetfall. Night had fallen a few hours ago, and the cold grabbed at everything with sharp fingers. Waisho's shell rifle was overheating from constant use, but the weapon's warmth was welcome in his hands. He hated the cold almost worse than the necro. Ordinian's night sky was awash with the faint light of the nebula, tendrils of purple and blue that snaked across the blackness. Only a double handful of stars shone through the gas and luminance of the nebula, but the sky was alight with flashes of deadly fire from the auto-turrets, necro drones and repurposed familiars exploding in regular blossoms of red and yellow. The firebase's own lights shone bright and white, stabbing down the eastern pass to reveal an endless tide of agri-familiars, industrial robots, and the occasional purpose-built murder drone. While the civilian robots were easily dispatched by the Marines, they provided cover for the lethal drones with their own long-ranged flechette attacks. More and more Marines had been downed with cries of Code Red or Code Black over the preceding hours, and 3 times Necro armor had stormed their position and nearly overrun it, only held off by sliver rockets aimed carefully by their best shots, a precious resource now all but gone. Waisho studied the chaotic boil of necro machines and waited for the distinctive skittering lurch of the combat drone, the whip-like tentacles that trailed behind it. His shell rifle barked, the explosive payload tearing the target apart. It was all numb, automatic, as mechanistic as the necro themselves. A part of himself panicked, flailing in the back of his mind.
Have we already lost? Has war made us as much machines of murder as the necro?
He longed once again for home, comfort, an escape from war.
Amazing, rasped Dukan. Now you're war gathering while shooting.
He sighted down the scope of his plasma rifle, surveying the damage Waisho's shell rifle had just inflicted.
Damn fine shooting too.
Waisho glanced over his shoulder, spotting Prin on her perch, Marines clustered behind their cover, orderlies at work on the wounded. They were as private as they ever were in the firebase.
I am tired,
he admitted.
I begin to worry we will not hold.
Course we won't, said Dukan. We die here, or we fall back and die in the valley.
Don't be so pessimistic,
chided Waisho.
We could survive long enough to have our transport shot down and die in flight.
Dukan barked a short, painful-sounding laugh. Ha, we'll make a Ordian out of you yet. The captain drummed his fingers on the casing of his plasma rifle, then sighted and let fly with a ragged burst. A low-slung prospecting drone that had skittered ahead of the others fell apart, holes burned through it by the incandescent plasma.
Grok,
Dukan said,
you should go. You're way outside your duties as an advisor here. Get down to the fortress, get on a transport, live to advise the next unit. Take a training post on your homeworld and make lots of little scaly babies.
For a moment, Waisho considered it. There'd be no shame in it. A training position would certainly be the best he could hope for in the extra-military after so flagrantly defying orders in the task force for so long. But he had friends who owed him favours. The dream wasn't beyond imagination. But he couldn't bear the thought of Dukan, Prin, all the others dying behind him while he simply walked away.
And leave all my fleshy mammal babies here to die?
He protested.
Besides, Jail, Captain, you know what it would do to morale for me to go.
Sure, the unit would hate to lose our backup mascot.
Backup mascot? Have I been demoted?
Dukan's response was not quite a smile, somewhere between a grimace and a grin. The best that could be managed under the circumstances, Waisho decided, shooting down another necro drone. But whatever his reply was going to be, it was interrupted by the earth shaking beneath them.
Well, that feels ominous,
said Dukan.
Necro-arty finally score a hit.
The auto-turrets and combat air patrol had thus far kept the threat of necro-artillery and their drone equivalent to long-range missiles at bay. The ground shook again, and a light glimmered at the far end of the eastern approach. A red light, a warning, the red of the necro's hatred. The light rose up into the air as the earth shook one more time, a dull thump reverberating through the entire company. A loud, buzzing sort of roar resounded from the approaching necro, and a light flashed, artificial thunder revealing the colossal form of a necro construct. An instant later, a bolt of plasma tore through the scaffold above the camp, shattering overhead lighting and sending their comms tower listing alarmingly to the south.
Kraken, muttered Dukan. Just one sliver rocket left, eh?
The monstrosity was a conglomeration of several necro abominations, latching themselves together to form a single impossible colossus.
The power plants of 7 Mordred-class mechs fed the plasma weaponry of a single villain-class gunship, all supplemented by lashing tendrils made of scores of lesser drones, chained end to end, propelled by numerous sets of metal legs. Each moment it crawled closer, its plasma cannon loosing another volley and claiming more and more organic lives. Waisho emptied his magazine, trying desperately to fend off the Titan for another moment. Around him, he heard Marines firing, crying for help, barking orders. He stooped to reload and found Dukan pressing a targeting laser array into his hands.
Captain, it won't do any good.
If I can take out that damn plasma cannon, he'll at least have to walk all the way over here to kill us.
It will be shielded.
The laser will go right through the shield, and I'll be inside it when I fire. Waisho held the array, looked downrange at their approaching doom.
I should go.
You're too damn slow, you overgrown turtle. I have a chance at least.
A chance,
Waisho agreed. It's been a pleasure, Dukan said, shouldering his sliver launcher.
An honor.
Dukan began advancing at a jog, running down the valley toward the monster. Cover me, wolfhounds, he barked. The surviving Marines rallied, pouring fire into the necro horde, sending rounds sparking into the shields of the enormous mech. Waisho deployed his oculars and studied the approaching menace, analysing the structure of its plasma gun and selecting the target for their remaining sliver rocket. He refused to contemplate that Dukan could do any less than reach his destination, refused to accept the possibility that the rocket would be wasted. He painted the target with a laser and waited.
You know, it occurs to me, came Dukan's voice in his ear, that these rockets were never really designed to have the launcher and the spotter this far apart. Now? It occurs to you now?
It's good old Ordian engineering. I'm sure it'll work just fine. Dukan staggered, a volley of toxic flechettes rattling off his armour. He turned his shoulders into the attack, sheltering the sliver rocket casing with his own body.
5 meters from the shield, Captain,
came Prin's voice over their connection. She had evidently worked out their plan. Smart girl, that Nars.
5 meters is nothing. I could do that on my knees.
Dukan's voice was coming ragged as he sprinted and slid into cover behind a rock outcropping. An agri-mech that looked something like a centipede climbed over the rock, raised up to strike, and fell apart in a pile of molten shards as a plasma rifle burned right through it.
Got you covered, Captain,
said Chen through the comms.
Hold there, said Prin. The Kraken's advance should bring you inside the shield in about 30 seconds.
You got me a target yet, Grok?
Painting the target,
said Waisho.
I suggest you fire immediately upon passing through the shield.
Hey, that's an idea. I'd planned on buying this thing dinner first, but why not skip the foreplay? Irregular fire from the Marines kept the shield shimmering. The lethal force of the projectiles dissipated as harmless blue light. Every second, the arc of the shield drew closer to Dukan's hiding place, and then it washed over him like a tingling wave.
You are inside the shield,
Prin announced.
Target is good,
said Waisho.
Dos vidania, you damn metal freak.
Dukan stood, pointed his sliver the right way, and fired. The rocket flashed, streaked to the target, and blew a hole right through the Kraken's plasma cannon housing. Secondary explosions triggered throughout the Kraken's central chassis, the villain-class gunship that formed its core coming apart. Then, oh hell, the Kraken's arms lashed at him. Dukan rolled away as the tendril slammed into the rocky soil at his side. The tendril broke apart, becoming several lethal drones, each leaping forward with scuttling legs like daggers.
Covering fire,
barked Chen, and a fusillade of plasma, lasers and munitions tore down the valley and lit up the Kraken's shields, barely a metre shy of Dukan's position. Dukan had his sidearm out. He fired, blew one necro drone apart, scrambled back and shot another just as it landed on him. He wrestled its twitching ruin off his chest just in time for the third drone to spear through his leg armor and pin him in position. "Keep holding, damn you," he shouted into their comms. "Keep that last bastion standing just a little longer." His sidearm was gone. He held the third drone away from his face with his empty hands until his head was torn apart by an anti-armor round from the Kraken. What followed wasn't, strictly speaking, silence. Guns fired, necro-drones chittered, the Kraken made an awful grinding noise as it paused to eject the broken villain and reconfigured its remaining parts. But it felt like silence in Waisho's heart as he numbly took up his shell rifle and checked its magazine. He felt something pluck at his shoulder and thought he'd been hit, but it was only Prin, climbing up for a better vantage and offering him a fresh shell magazine.
"I know," she said. "It felt like a hole had gone right through me when V died."
V must have been Prin's rocker partner. Waisho couldn't remember if he'd learned her name before now. "We weren't. Our relationship wasn't." He retracted his oculars, reloaded his shell rifle, lined up, and fired as a fresh wave of necro-drones came out from within the Kraken's shield array. The next moment, Sergeant Chen rattled into position behind the barricade at his side. The Ordian's armor was still red with his own blood, his eyes wild from the stims keeping him upright. "Orders, sir." "I don't give orders for this company," said Waisho. "But Captain Dukan did. You all heard him." His voice rose, taking in the whole company. "We hold until the evacuation is complete or a miracle occurs." A cheer went up from the assembled Marines, and 2 more waves of incoming necro-drones were torn apart as they charged. But the Kraken, reassembled, continued its inexorable advance, bringing the guns of its Mordred-class components online. "What's the status of the evacuation?" Waisho asked Prin, falling back to the comms station. Miraculously, despite the damage to the entire base, it seemed to still be working. Prin scrambled from his shoulder and slipped into her comms headset.
"Hi, Wolfhound 7. Wolfhound actual is KIA. We have an incoming necro heavy mech and no remaining sliver rockets. Please advise."
"Wolfhound, hi, stand by." The voice crackled over the comms. It sounded strained, Waisho decided. It's hard watching people die. "What the hell is that?" One of the Marines, Van Sant, was pointing at the dark sky above. Waisho turned, puzzled, to see a streak of angry red fire across the watercolour depths of the nebula above.
"It looks like a re-entry burn," said Prin. "Hi, we see re-entry burn from our position. Please advise."
"Wolfhound, what you're seeing is the FSS Orlando using aerobraking as part of its flight plan. Support is incoming from Orlando. Seek shelter." Waisho turned and bellowed. "Hi, reports danger close. Incoming ordnance. Seek shelter. Anyone who can make it. To the bunker." He reached out and scooped Prin up, boosting her to his exocarapace, and lumbered into the underground bunker at top speed. Most of the company beat him inside, with a few others slipping in behind, while those at the furthest edges of the base took shelter at other hardened positions. The first impact struck as Van Sant and Chen were slamming the door shut. A bright light, a wave of dust, and then the door was closed. But the thunder of an angry god continued above their heads, each explosion shaking dust from the ceiling above. The electric lights shook and flickered in their housings, and the assembled Marines were silent but for their breathing and the moans of the wounded. Within minutes, the cadence of the cacophony shifted. From sharp percussive shocks, it began a crescendo of light and heat, an angry red glow sneaking through the grit-streaked slits that passed for windows in the underground barracks. The world resonated with a hum, then a pulse, then a scream of deadly intensity. "What is that?" asked Chen after a few minutes. "Has the bombardment stopped? What is that sound?" "Metal on metal," said Van Sant. "Sounds like demons dying in droves." Only a few piercing shrieks made it through the layers of ferrocrete and steel between them and the outside world, but Weisho had to admit that Van Sant had described it well. Whatever was happening outside, sheltering in place seemed their only chance of living through it. Specialist Prin had found a new nest of clustered monitors and instruments, which she played like an organ with her 4 arms flashing.
Seismic indicator shows the impacts have stopped. EM interference is spiking. If that's a weapon out there, it's a weird one.
Maybe someone is killing all the necrovirus with the power of music, suggested Van Sant, to riotous laughter.
Yeah, the music of hot plasma at 30 meters.
The Marines swapped boasts, jokes, increasingly improbable guesses about what was happening outside. Weisho crossed to where Prin roosted and crouched down beside her. "Can you raise Hai-Ai?" She shook her head.
The long-range comms gear is outside and probably scragged by now.
"Any guesses what Orlando is doing out there?"
Not a one. Those were kinetic impacts from a mass driver, the first volley. Could have come from Orlando or Durandal or any of the other ships in orbit.
Bombs were unnecessary when one side had orbital dominance. A simple metal slug dropped from orbit had all the explosive power any commander could want.
But they stopped after only a few minutes.
Did Orlando fail? Are we hearing the necrovirus tear them apart right now?
If so, we'll find out when they blast that door off its hinges.
They both glanced at the door. It did not explode into 1,000 white-hot shards, revealing a necro-death machine intent on their destruction. "Cheerful thought," Weisho said, and leaned back against the bunker wall. They remained in the bunker for 30 minutes while the sounds of death and destruction faded away. Eventually, Weisho opened the door himself and stepped outside, Prin on his shoulder. He climbed up the steps to survey what remained of Wolfhound Base and was unsurprised to find it mostly rubble. The comms tower had fallen over completely, the base lights all destroyed. Only the flickering of a few fires and the beginnings of a rosy dawn lit their scene at all. But down the eastern edge of their valley were the shattered remains of more necromechs than he could count, and to the west, the lights of Fortress Ordinian still shone. "So our bastion stands," said Weisho. Prin's comm crackled.
"Wolfhound, this is Fortress with a relay from Hai-Ai. How copy?"
With the firebase's comms tower destroyed, direct transmission to and from orbit would no longer be an option. But apparently, they could still raise Fortress, and Fortress was still alive.
"Fortress, Wolfhound 7, solid copy."
"Wolfhound, Hai-Ai reports all quiet. Stand by for extraction." Prin looked up at Weisho. He nodded.
"Wolfhound standing by,"
she said into her comm. One by one, Marines emerged from their shelter, staring with wide eyes at the transformed world around them, or the remnants of one. The same disbelieving relief that Weisho had seen on battlefields all over the galaxy. "What was that, Chief?" Chen asked, sitting on a broken barricade. "Until a miracle happens." "So it seems."
"Hai-Ai reports all quiet," said Prin. "All quiet? The whole planet? Is that possible?"
Weisho shrugged. "We'll find out more when our ride gets here." A wave of exhaustion and euphoria coursed through him, and Weisho sagged, propping himself up next to Chen. "But, yes, I believe we can now list Ordinian as the first world reclaimed from the necrovirus."
"I'm home," breathed Prin.
"Yes," said Weisho. He thought of Archon Ren, of the horde of scaly babies Dukan had insisted he go have, of what home meant. "So am I." This audio recording is copyright Fantasy Flight Games 2025. All rights reserved. Produced and published by Aconite Books.
For more from the universe of Twilight Imperium, visit aconitebooks.com and subscribe to the Aconite Fiction Podcast.